Welcome to episode 7 of Unscripted Let's Talk. I'm Mary Eggleston. I'm here with Sarah Schaffner, and today's topic is birth order. And this is actually part 1 of I'm not sure how many parts this will take us into, because it really lends itself to a discussion of family dynamics. The more that I have thought about talking about this today, the more I have realized that there are so many dynamics within this topic to discuss. So we're going to start with, I'd like to tell you a story about, a classic exercise that's done to help people understand what birth order is about. And you're aware of this story, aren't you, Sarah?
Yes, it's one of my favorites.
It's just a really good one. And it's super fun to do when you're doing a workshop and helping people to understand just one piece of what's impacted them in terms of their lives and who they believe they are. And of course, all of these podcasts are about promoting self-awareness for our listeners. And so I hope that this does. If you take a room full of people, just a random room full of people who might attend a workshop, and you put them into 3 groups. One group of firstborns, another group of middle children, and another group of the youngest in the family, the babies of the family. And when I've done this, I give them a task and I say, so I'd like everyone, all the different groups, to plan a party. And I give everybody, whatever time they seem to need. And as I watch the 3 groups plan a party, what I notice is the firstborns get right to it. They are on it. And they're talking and they're very serious about it, and they're just really planning that party. The middle group seems to be also throwing in a lot of jokes and kind of getting to know each other, and but they're writing things down. And the babies, and this is always hilarious, do a couple things, and then they just sit and laugh and tell jokes and whatever. So what I ask then when people are done, Sarah just said, yeah, right. I'm going to reveal to you now, Sarah is a firstborn.
That's an important part.
What?
That's an important part.
That's an important part. That's why she said, yeah, right, with those babies. Anyway, so then when I ask them, okay, tell me about the party that you've planned. The firstborn give details, how it's going to be. They might have a theme. It's a whole way that they're going to put it together, activities, how the flow of it's going to go, and any number of things like that.
Yeah,
Sarah?
and it's usually very practical, very responsible, maybe even a little bit conservative type of party.
Yep. The middle children, the main thing is that everybody feels welcome. Everybody is there to have a good time, and everyone feels that it's fair to everyone, and we just got to make sure everyone's included. And so their focus is on that. The babies, meanwhile, are sitting there with a confused expression on their face, and I say, so, tell me about the party. And they said, well, we're going to buy some beer and invite people over. And they're done.
Right.
And you can watch in a room like this, where when the babies do that, the firstborn send serious, judgmental stares towards those babies. And that kind of gives just an overview, doesn't it, Sarah?
It does. That's an excellent overview.
So, this is part 1 of birth order. And birth order, the idea of it being important was actually identified by Alfred Adler in 1870. He's a very famous person in the field of psychology, psychiatry. He was actually an ophthalmologist initially. And then he went into regular practice as a physician. And then he met someone everyone's heard of, and that's Sigmund Freud. He did part ways with Sigmund Freud in terms of believing that everything was so unconscious and built in, and actually Freud kind of got into everything being driven by sex. And Adler said, I think that the social aspects of life really impact who we become. And so he started to part ways with Freud and went towards a more holistic view of child development, actually emphasizing the social impact. And he didn't mean that birth order is the whole thing in that impact. It's simply an important one. The areas that we would identify as impacting child development and your personality development would be like biological. You know, you inherit a certain intelligence.
Yep.
You even inherit, it looks like, a certain level of courage from your parents. And you certainly inherit physical features. And so that
Absolutely.
impacts your personality.
Right.
Yeah. Social, your interactions with others, peers, adults. I mean, how was school, for you? Were you popular? Were you left out? Were you a leader? Were you a follower? Were you somewhere in between? Did you hope to just get to go along? How did all that go? That absolutely impacts you. Cultural, both cultural impact, conscious and unconscious. A lot of people are amazingly unaware of how the culture you've been raised in impacts what you believe to be true and your personality.
I'd agree.
Yeah. Situational. What situations have you faced? Many people, even as children, were faced with trauma. Or maybe their families moved a lot, and so you had to always adjust and readjust. You didn't get to be one of the people who, we've been friends since preschool, blah, blah, blah. Not everybody gets to do that. Some people are always the new kid in school. So, there's a whole different personality development that happens there. The physical environment. If you grew up in a city, your view of life and the way your personality is going to develop is going to be very different than if you were raised in a rural setting.
Right.
But today, what we're going to look at is the idea of, in the situational, what's it like in a family when you invite a new sibling? And to that, I am going to go to my person who's sitting right across from me,
Right.
the firstborn. And I'd like Sarah to tell us about what's it like to be a firstborn and welcome that next child who takes you off your pedestal and makes you have to share and all those things that what firstborn would want to do that?
Right. And all of those things that you just listed, I think, is what makes birth order hard to research. So I'm going to jump ahead to your question in terms of my family probably fits the regular mold in terms of, what makes birth order easy to study. And so with that said, what was it like for me to welcome that second child? And I'm the oldest of 4, so I got to welcome a couple other ones along the way too. But the first
you
one,
did welcome him at all.
right? Well, that might be true.
As a 4th out of 5, I'm wondering, really? Did you welcome
care?
us?
And so in true fashion, with myself and my next youngest brother, I went one direction and he went another direction. And so I followed the path of, I was very responsible. I did well in school. I listened to the rules. I respected authority, all of those wonderful things. So when my brother came along and did the opposite of those things, it was definitely, and made my job maybe a little bit harder in terms of the responsibility that, now not only did I do these things naturally, but now I have a sibling that's doing the opposite of these things. So now I have to even try harder to make sure I'm upholding those traits that were placed upon me.
And the firstborn carries the flag of the family, whatever that flag is. If the family is like hillbillies, the firstborn will be the best hillbilly of all. If the family is success-driven, the firstborn will be the most success-driven.
Right.
But what you're saying is that in your family, you wanted to be appealing, and not create any waves and be that child that your parents could say, isn't she something? Look at Sarah. And
Right.
your brother said, oh yeah, is that role taken? Fine, I'll go this way.
I'll do my own.
I'm going to go do something else. Screw that.
Right. And you bring up a point, because a lot of times firstborns get a bad rap for being bossy, and you know, there's some truth to that a little bit. But there's also another side of that where firstborns are very compliant and very, you know, do play that role where they're just kind of the ideal child, or kind of more of a nurturer or caregiver type.
And that
qualities.
really can create its own level of stress. I'm thinking of a man who is a firstborn who was drawn into some really difficult family circumstances, and he became his mother's right-hand man in terms of figuring things out. And he tried so hard, and it kind of set him up to always see himself as somebody who has to fix things for other people. I have to be there for everyone. And his therapy has been about, you do not have to be Superman.
Right.
You don't have to be the most responsible person in every room you're in. And he feels so sad when he cannot fix things for other people, because that is his purpose.
That's what he's supposed to do.
And so to take the edge off of that becomes, you know, the self-awareness that he needs to come
He needs
to.
to get there.
Now your brother, that classic second born, where I'm just gonna, you know, flip off that firstborn role, and I'm gonna go this other direction and get attention in my way. And
Right.
it doesn't mean that they turn into somebody, you know, like a
bad person.
bad person or a delinquent, but they're gonna go in another direction and maybe thumb their nose at the rules a bit.
Right.
And you'd say that's a little bit of what your brother did.
Absolutely, yeah. Compliance was not something that he was working towards.
So then when we go to like more of a middle child position, which would be the position that I
you,
was
Mary.
raised in,
Yeah.
we tend to be a bit more flexible because we have to be. I have siblings who are older than I am, siblings that are younger than I am. There's a frustration, a feeling of nobody's ever listening to me. I'm not very important, I'm insignificant, but I desperately want everybody to get along. And I can remember reading about, it's the only time I ever found anything about somebody who is literally the fourth child with other children in the family. And it said that my position has a real awareness of social justice, and that would honestly define my life.
Right.
I'm really into things need to be fair.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, I don't like people being mistreated, and I'm gonna pretty much throw a fit about that. Though we're peacemakers, we also tend to be oddly rebellious at the same time, but we're just kind of hoping to have everybody get along. And then there's the babies, Sarah. What would you say about the baby?
This probably
Babies.
right. This probably,
Shout out to Todd Herbold, who hoped to be here, but he's not.
This is having an oldest child describe the babies. It's probably a little unfair, but I will do my
they
best
get you anyway.
to paint them in a good light, because they do have great strengths, and I
Yes, they do.
honestly am thankful for them. But they're definitely going to be more outgoing, more creative, maybe bored easily in
Yeah.
terms of they want to stay busy and have different things to do. Funny. Babies are
They tend to be the
fun
funniest
to
ones
hang
in the
out with.
family.
Yes, they are very funny.
Yeah.
And maybe even a little bit competitive based on having so many siblings and trying to find a way to make themselves known or gain some of that attention within the family too.
I think too, the younger children, especially the youngest, they zip through the developmental stages as quickly as they possibly can.
Yeah.
I know that with my younger son, I did not have to do any toilet training. I didn't have, there's so many things I didn't have to do. He watched his brother and he was in a hurry to get there.
Right.
And so the youngest in a bigger family is gonna just kind of speed
Just
up.
have all that to look at. Yeah, my youngest brother actually was able to skip a grade in elementary school because he liked to pay attention to what we were doing apparently with school, and just would do our stuff and learned very quickly. So.
Yeah. So babies have a lot going for them,
Right.
maybe especially in terms of being creative. Again, none of this means that they're the only ones who are creative, but this appears to be the impact of the different positions you can find yourself in a family.
Right.
And then there's the only child. What
Right.
would you say about them?
I think only children share a lot of characteristics of the oldest child, except for almost like they're on steroids. They're like even a little bit better. They're a little bit more mature. They're a little more responsible.
On steroids.
Right. And so, but no, they share a lot of stuff, but just being that only child and all that focus from their parents going into just one child probably likely advances some of those traits that you'll find in an oldest as well.
And I think an only child has, for obvious reasons, a deeper attachment to their parents than maybe people with, several siblings. They're going to have because they're going to go along with their mom and dad pretty much everywhere.
Right.
Their conversations are going to be with their mom and their dad.
Yeah.
They're going to have more of an adult kind of language, much like an oldest child, but even, again, more so.
More so, yeah.
That's really true. Yeah. Yeah, so, and then there are all the other types of birth order positions that we'll touch on this time, and then we're going to continue our conversation in the next episode. And those are things like, if there's 7 years between you and your sibling, what we found developmentally is that really that creates a situation where you're really both only children, because you're not going to bother to fight with somebody who's 7 years younger than you are.
Right.
You learn a lot about relationships in terms of how you interact with your siblings. Fighting things through, arguing things, negotiating things. 7 years, you don't really bother.
Right. And if there's that 7 year gap, and then you have another sibling, and maybe you have 3 other siblings, that whole birth order just starts over.
That's true.
Versus,
I have had people tell me, well, I really grew up in, I'm the oldest of the second group.
Yeah.
And they aren't kidding. And they truly have the traits of the oldest child. They were in charge. They led the way. They're the ones who had to get everybody out the door and onto the bus. I mean, different things like that oldest children are asked to do, that a youngest child is saying, yeah, I'm not gonna put my socks on. And that oldest child is saying, you have to, come on, we're in a hurry. All that kind of stuff that goes on.
That was my house.
Yeah, really? Growing up?
Yeah.
So, and then Adler also spoke of what he referred to as the ghost child. And that would be the child that's comes after a sibling who has died, or is born after a child who has died. And that has a very special impact, obviously, on how they're going to feel about, why they're there. Their mother, father might be more protective. They might just get more of a message of, we're worried about you.
Right.
I mean, what would you say about that?
Right. Yeah, no, I think that is absolutely true. And whether that comes most likely, from the parent's trauma of losing a child, and that just shifts your parental focus, and then thus the interactions or the attention that you, or the way in which you interact with that child that comes afterwards, for sure.
Yeah. I've had people describe to me that they felt that they had to make up for the loss to their mother or their father, that they had to be even more pleasing, more attached. And they either went the way of actually trying to do that, or they rebel against it, and they go in a very different direction.
Right. And that reminds me of the narrative piece that we did in a previous episode, in terms of kind of what you're telling yourself and how that continues to play out later in life. And that's for any of the birth orders that we've talked about that can very well happen. But the one that you just mentioned with the ghost child's very evident,
Powerful.
and how that, would continue to play out.
My own story, I'm not quite just a middle child, because developmental issues can come into play too. If there is a child with any kind of disability, whether mental or physical, that can impact the next child. My older sister was born with a bit of a physical disability that created a special circumstance, and I came along 2 years later, and really emotionally, and it took me quite a while to understand that this was what went on for me growing up. But I was asked by my parents to be the older sister to my older sister. And, I started to know that in my own exploration of my family. So I have, and I'm sure you've noticed this, Sarah, I have a number of firstborn traits.
You do.
Because of that. And so although I also ache for harmony, and I have this, huge need for social justice, I also try to step up and run the show, though, of course, I could never hit the mark of doing that, because you can't be the older sister to your older sister. But when we were much older, I think we were in our 50s when I discovered this, they used to, you had to apply to get your child's social security number. And I found out that my social security number precedes my sister's. And that, I think, speaks to emotionally where my parents were at. When I was born, they went ahead and got a social security number for me, and then got one for my sister.
Wow.
And I think that, so that's a huge aspect of my story and my narrative.
Right.
And then, of course, there's adoption. That can have a tremendous impact too, in terms of how you experienced your place in the family.
Right.
Where there are families that they celebrate the gotcha day.
Yeah.
This is the day we got you. There are families where the adopted child feels other or extra special. I mean, what would you add to that, Sarah?
I would add to that age, I think, makes a big difference as well. If you were the oldest child and then your family adopted somebody older than you,
Whoa.
that would create, a whole completely different dynamic versus if it's going to change the dynamics regardless. But I think there's some dynamics that would be more impactful than others. And also the age that you were when your family adopted a child. If you were younger, maybe it would be less impactful in terms of that's how you've grown up, that's what you've experienced, and the birth order sort of works itself out a little bit. But there's other pieces of that as well. It's not that simple, but yeah, I think age plays a big part.
And then another big part that is in there is gender.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Forever, the whole, especially maybe in the upper Midwest, but I think this is more global, the belief that you need to have a boy. You want to have a boy. It's important to have a boy. You haven't really had, met the need of the family and passing the name along and all that kind of silliness.
Right.
You have to have a boy. And so all the way to, and this is just so crass to think about, they used to refer to when you had a girl that the man was shooting blanks.
Oh, right.
Until you have a boy, the woman has not fulfilled her purpose. If you look at England, off with her head because she didn't birth a boy.
Right.
And you know what I'm talking about? Was it King Henry?
I think so.
Yeah, whatever. Anyway, and so if you're the firstborn, but you're a girl and you're a disappointment because we wanted a boy.
Right.
I mean, the impact on you is enormous. Yeah. And really, in your circumstance, had your family been, maybe over-focused on that, Sarah,
right,
it would have been that you were brushed aside because, now we've got what we wanted. We have a boy. And I've worked with countless women who have had that experience. And I've worked with countless men who've had this weird pressure because they had to somehow step up and be the boy and live the life their fathers never lived, or they're the only boy in a family of girls, so they were treated like a prince, or you were just, no matter what you achieved as a girl, it was never enough because you can't be a boy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a very simple way that roles can get swapped, and you end up taking on a different role than the typical birth order roles that we've talked about earlier.
Yeah. So what we're going to leave you with today is for you to take a moment and think about the different variables that were present when you were a child. And how was the world presented to you? And how did you take it in? And how is it playing itself out? What was your purpose? I mean, what were your circumstances when you were born? Had your parents tried really hard for a long, long time and they were just so thrilled and then there you were? Did you follow 2 or 3 miscarriages? I mean, what is your story? And then what was your purpose? What did you experience as your purpose? You know, think back to your family. Who was the smart one? Who was the good one? Who was the funny one, the pretty one, the handsome one? And who were you? And how does this affect you today? So I'm going to turn it over to Sarah to kind of do a wrap up.
Yeah. Before I forget, the first thing I want to say, or to remind everyone, that they can send us an email with comments, questions, feedback, anything that they would like to share. And our email is unscriptedletstalk@gmail.com. And that's all together, one word, unscripted, let's talk. But overall, Mary, I thought you did a great wrap up with those questions. It definitely is a way to get us thinking about how this impacts us, if it impacts us, and what variables might have changed us in a way that we don't necessarily meet some of those traits that fall in line with where we are in our birth order. So,
yeah, and the idea being that the more that you get to know yourself, the more choices you will really have in your life. You know, otherwise we're choosing out of almost a hypnosis, you know, a lack of consciousness. And so, you know, that's really my hope in these podcasts, is to create more self-awareness so that you really can see through the veil of what you believed were these truths, and they're not. So remember to live with intention, passion, and purpose. Until next time.